Hello and welcome to this week's 52 Weeks. This week we're continuing in Chapter 5, almost done. We've got subsection 6, which is looking at observations. I know these are not labeled within the comp plan, but I broke these down because it's a little easier to digest them in sections. So the observation looks at the remedies for the disinvestment that has occurred over 40 plus years of not having plans to work within our communities, and particularly a grassroots level effort. In my opinion, I think it's a grave situation. We look at this quote, given the extreme deferred maintenance in the Allison Hill and Camp Curtin neighborhoods, if conditions are not aggressively addressed, the city will soon lose large swaths of attractive, irreplaceable historic building stock. I think that's pretty apparent in all the discussions we've had about why the comp plan is necessary. Another reality is, given the slow, low-growth economy in central PA, it is unlikely that these buildings will ever be replaced with buildings of similar size, durable, fireproof construction, and levels of fine masonry and carpentry details. The loss forever diminishes the character of the city's neighborhoods. So every time we lose a building, we lose this idea and character of our neighborhoods. That's in Chapter 5, is kind of wrapping up the past segments of why this is important, that demolition should be used with extreme caution. So this loss of embodied energy from the demolition of historic building stock is irreplaceable. And when we talk about embodied energy, that is the value of energy and materials required to initially construct the building. And this is how we should be thinking about our structures when we evaluate our buildings. So we look at the three factors of embodied energy. The first one is physical irreplaceability, that once destroyed, the individual asset will never be put back, permanently damaging the integrity of the continuous historic housing fabric that are the city's aggregate assets. Number two, cultural incomparability. In instances where the buildings are replaced with similar housing types, the new construction does not compare to the scale, materials, or detail of the original structure. The original structure, which was built with skilled, inexpensive labor during times of economic boom, its value to the city's cultural landscape is erased. As we've seen and talked about this isn't unique to Harrisburg. This is true to any city on the globe, that when we lose a building, the amazing thing is that in this modern society we're building with materials and changed. This mindset of buildings are completely replaceable and limited use. So within a 30 to 40 years lifespan, if that the building is taken down and redone. So I encourage you, as you're going around Central PA, look at the demolition that's been happening on some of the buildings that are taken down to put up new buildings and new structures. Notice this on the Carlisle Pike within Union Deposit. There's some other places in Lancaster and Hershey and York. These buildings are always seen as temporary. So we've changed our mindset in society where the building is very, very short term, and that's a detriment when we look at the amount of energy that's put into a building. Number three, economically, demolition of historic housing stock eliminates the future use of the embodied value in each structure. Thus, demolition without replacement by substantially larger and more expensive structure yields a permanent reduction in the aggregate property value of the city. So we lose some aggregate value whenever we demo a building within a block. We talked about the urban fabric and also urban space and these characteristics that are lost because of demolition. This brings us to having a need for triple bottom line thinking. Continue to say this wherever I go. Our mindset needs to change beyond the economics. We are so driven by the money and return on investment, and instead of looking at inherent value that is transcending the dollar or transcending a monetary value, we should implore folks to change the way we value our city. This is a very different approach to valuation than the object value, the immediate utilitarian value, standard appraisal assigns to structure after the cost of development and construction are paid. So even our real estate investment and banking is all set up for that in the approach. In effect, these metrics capture and quantify forms of value that permanently acknowledge the value of human toil and creativity through time. In the current valuation system, when a property owner demolishes a structure, the sole cost to the owner is that of demolition. However, we can also see that the city loses a part of its aggregate cultural and physical assets. City's best interest is served when the aggregate value of property within the city is optimized. As stated in the comp plan, these historic masonry buildings tend to be designed and built as better investments and more sustainable properties than contemporary subsidized market rate wood frame buildings can possibly be. Another observation of reinvestment, given the observed patterns of reinvestment in the city since 1970, demolition is tantamount to permanent shrinkage of the city. Thus, the decision to demolish a building must be carefully weighed, as the most likely outcome is a permanently empty lot and permanent removal of improvements from the tax roll. Addressing deferred maintenance should be the city's preferred strategy to retain long-term taxable assets at a reasonable short-term cost. Addressing deferred maintenance should be the city's preferred strategy to retain long-term taxable assets at reasonable short-term costs. On a sidebar note, in the comp plan, balancing supply and demand, current imbalance in housing units, we've got approximately 25,000, and of those, there are 20,000 that are occupied, so there's a difference of 5,000 vacant units. And the quote is, the supply of housing must shrink without random demolition that fragments neighborhoods. So there's got to be a planning process involved to make sure that this doesn't fragment our communities even further. That was part of our problem in not having any planning process for the past 43 years. This is why the key is in the small area plans and understanding from a community grassroots level, working together to shore up these vacant houses. So here's some thoughts about the idea of demolition and vacant lots. Random demolition for land banking has been a failed policy. That's given our history. We can see that in the data for the past 43 years. The strategic land banking is necessary but benefiting residents, not developers or large projects. The intent must be created completed building fabric, and the current approach of gap financing is there, but the city should be guiding the structured transactions. This is a long-range strategy in a comprehensive and regional way. Understanding how do we balance the supply and demand. Since development is almost always structured with public money as gap financing, the public should benefit from the publicly funded development supporting a clearly articulated, approved community development plan. This is the problem with a lot of these plans. When development plans come up, they're always done in isolation, and I've got a few from Google to see some of where this is happening. In Midtown and downtown are all in isolation. They're not looked in the context of the community from around that place. Under this policy, the city will enjoy faster realization of its small area plans, and we need unprecedented community-supported grassroots activism and engagement. That's the critical key in this. So this is why I put this video together, because there's not enough of this happening. And with the 52 weeks, trying to pull together the understanding of the Harrisburg Comprehensive Plan so that an individual resident could understand the process and how to get involved. And this is going to take a community effort. This is not led by me. This is not led by a single group. This is all of us together. Well, what is one of the solutions? The idea is the power of the small area plans. This is a keystone piece because, one, there's opportunities for collective rehabilitation and greening of our communities in these small area plans. Number two, there's a sophisticated skill set for unique assets. There's going to be needing to develop a workforce in an educated community, a professional learning community that's going to be focused on this stuff, that it's not just things that are from the outside, or we're bringing folks from the outside in. Again, we want to make sure that it's done with us and not to us. And the number three is the economic volume of rehabilitation, is that it starts to generate dollars and stays within the Harrisburg communities themselves. We developed businesses and approaches that we look at a triple bottom line in building up the people in place, and then also reap the economic benefits of that process in a sustainable way. So how can the small area plans benefit? Well, we look at it in understanding a collective process and grouping of shared assets and ideas. This is not going to happen at every single block. This is going to be something that gets worked out at the small area plans. The collective is the group scale facilitating housing improvements. So when we look at collective bids for the entire block, is how do we aggregate the necessary maintenance that needs to happen or renovation of houses. And this is in the areas of mechanical systems, electrical upgrades, solar panels, green roofing, insulation, historic window repair, and so forth and so on. This could also be accessibility changes that happen with first floor apartments, ramps, ADA compliance. All these things are small little micro economies that actually focus on our buildings, and therefore helping the people who occupy these buildings as well. Significant lower cost to each resident is when we look at a collective bid process and a collective maintenance process in facilities. Guarantees craftsmanship of work, that we start to look at getting a higher quality in working together and the value of craft. It also reduces operating costs and increases energy savings when we start to look at the renovations that happen within our houses. So collectively, we can look at a smart grid of our buildings and understand the value that we're getting in getting off the grid or reducing our energy usage. This could be water, heat, and electricity. Another critical piece in these small area plans is unique assets. These are clearly beyond simple code enforcements, help difficulties with residents qualifying for loans, grants, or the funding to improve their buildings. We need ways to support sustainable building maintenance. We need to develop these mechanisms to help build and transform this. This is where traditional means in our economy and our real estate industry, that is not currently helping. There's very innovative things that are happening in other cities and other locations. This was launched, particularly in Philly, earlier this year in the program that's called the Restore, Repair, and Renew program, looking at existing houses. This was developed by the Philadelphia Redevelopment Authority. And the idea is to figure out how to help residents get necessary funds so that they can upgrade and maintain their current houses, because the city's value is in its individual residential assets. And we look at how big Harrisburg is and the percentage of residential structures we have, it's a huge deal. Because if we're not investing into our residential, if we only focus on the savior of commercial or economic interests of business, that's not it. When we look at the buildings, our buildings still need to get be addressed. And the problem is currently in the system of taxing and property taxes and all that, that's not even helping us either. Item number 3 looks at economics, focusing on the approximately 4,700 vacant housing properties. Assuming each unit requires $50,000 in improvement, generates approximately $250 million in construction. So that's a huge industry and economic boost that we could be looking at in our area. When I look at this now, I'm looking at what's happening in Midtown and all the amount of renovation that's happening in our houses and where that is going. How far outside the region is it going? And those folks who are doing it are not building any capacity within our neighborhood. So there's not even a training process and a involving of our youth in education. So I think that might be a good way to look at this, is tie it back into training and youth corps. How do we do this during the summer in renovating projects around the city? This should be some of the things we look at when funding is put out and put forth to these projects. We look at the housing stock. Again, 18.3 to 59.2% of the occupied housing stock is used as rental property. The sheer amount of construction necessary is vast. So we look at the housing stock is occupied, and that's the amount of rentals that are there. Another quote out of the comp plan: by another method, the available appreciation between the city median house price and the area median house price is about $71,000, suggesting that there's 1.7 billion in structural undervaluation of the city's housing stock. Thus, a 7% increase in housing valuation would create a collateral to support the equity pool large enough to address the estimated deferred maintenance. So even looking at reevaluating our own buildings, and we can find this amount of money to fund deferred maintenance. So we come back to the triple bottom line thinking. By addressing the needs of the city, the people in place, the economics will follow. This is the whole logic of this, is that we've got the model backwards if we focus just on the economic bottom line or the return on investment. If we're just taking the investment, this return on investment, separating that from where we live, we work, where we spend our time and money, and we only see it as an economic investment or a transaction, that has hurt us. That's the problem where we're at, because we followed that for so many years, so many decades.